All right, welcome into the Big Hitters Only podcast. A little intro here, maybe a little rant here as well before we bring on our two guests. So Tuesday was a pretty big day for UNC basketball. News broke late Monday after UNC's win at Florida State that the Tar Heels are hiring Jim Tanner as the new GM and executive director for UNC basketball. Jim Tanner is an alum of UNC. He's a Morehead Scholar. He's from High Point. He's been a pretty big, high-powered NBA agent in the Washington, D.C. area for over 20 years. Also a graduate of Chicago Law School. So that's just a big shift in the way UNC basketball is going to operate. He's going to bring in a staff, of a couple people, including Buzz Peterson, who played with Michael Jordan at UNC, has been a college coach for many, many years. So the hire of Jim Tanner is just a huge change, shift, and evolution for UNC basketball as the Tar Heels move into this modern age and adapt to an era of basketball where the transfer portal is maybe as or even more important than recruiting, high school prep recruiting, and where the acquisition of talent domestically and internationally is huge. And then contracts, dealing with NIL demands, working with companies to bring in NIL money, working with the collective, and then negotiating with agents and families for talent, whether through the transfer portal or through the grassroots basketball scene. So we bring on Brendan Marks from The Athletic to talk about that. Brendan covers UNC and Duke, along with providing a national perspective to college basketball. He was great, really dove deep into this hire of Jim Tanner. Also talked to Hubert Davis and his new contract, and kind of talked about what that means for UNC basketball now and for the future. Super knowledgeable and provided a lot of good insight into just the current state of UNC basketball and the hire of Jim Tanner. So make sure you check out to listen to that interview, which is going to come first. Also want to talk about our sponsor, Delta Spirits. Drink deltaspirits.com. Promo code BHO. We've been selling a lot of these. They come in little cans. That's the blueberry lemonade flavor. We have ginger mule. We also have cherry limeade. And we have, what is this? Paloma. So great little 12-ounce cans. Kind of like a little cocktail, THC-based beverage. And this is kind of like a liquor substitute as well. So drink deltaspirits.com, a local Kernersville and Greensboro company. Use the promo code BHO10 to get 10% off your order. And we get a little kickback from that, so it helps us pay our producer and graphics guy. Following the Brendan Marks interview, we bring on Brian Murphy from WRAL. He is an investigative reporter for WRAL, big time capital J. He dives into the Hubert Davis contract extension, which also broke on Wednesday morning. It had been signed in December, worked out over the summer following UNC's 2023-24 season when they were a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. Hubert Davis gets a 2-year contract extension, more money added to his base salary. So we go through the whole contract, line by line, breaking down the numbers and talking about what it means for UNC. We also talk about Bill Belichick and that contract and that hire. Brian Murphy was pretty in the front there of the whole Belichick hire. So there was a great conversation with Brian. Definitely two different types of interviews, two different types of journalists, which cover UNC in different ways, and two new additions to the BHO guest family of guests. So that's great here. So make sure you stay on. Listen to Brendan Marks, Brian Murphy, drink deltaspirits.com, promo code BHO. I'll save my rant. Might be better with Connor and Spencer on. I got some thoughts on UNC's evolution and just modernizing how they approach basketball. So we'll talk again. Probably do another podcast interview. UNC has Miami on Saturday, and they have Virginia Tech on Tuesday and Duke next Saturday. So we'll probably do one maybe after the Virginia Tech game would be good to lead into the Duke game. Again, UNC defeats Florida State. I thought UNC's playing better. Quickly here, UNC's playing better. They've gone big with Jalen Withers and Vidal Lubin and Drake Powell in the starting lineup. And look, they are dominating teams in rebounding. They're shooting the ball better. Everything is going a little smoother as they rebound more and they make baskets. They're shooting a pretty good clip from the field in the last 3 games. They're knocking down threes. They're expanded who's hitting threes with Jalen Withers. Kay Tyson getting some play as well. So UNC's playing better. They're on a 4-game win streak, but they have to win the next 2 games. Beating Duke would be incredible. I don't see that happening. And they're going to have to win a couple games in the tournament as well, and maybe have to beat a Louisville or Clemson in the AC tournament to even sniff the NCAA tournament. So, though UNC is playing better, I think it's a little fool's gold. I think the competition has been very, very bad with NC State, Syracuse, Virginia, and Florida State on Monday. I think those are pretty bad teams at the bottom half of the ACC. But you can only play who's ahead of you. UNC on a 4-game win streak should beat Miami, should beat Virginia Tech, roll into Duke on a 6-game win streak, see what happens in the AC tournament, and then maybe get a bid. Right now, they're on the outside looking in. But they are playing better, so credit to the Tar Heels. All right, guys, appreciate you listening. DeltaSpirits.com, drinkdeltaspirits.com. We got Brendan Marks, and we got Brian Murphy coming up next. All right, now we bring on Brendan Marks to Big Hitters Only for his first appearance. Brendan Marks is a college basketball writer for The Athletic. Is that the right title, Brendan? What all do you do?
Yeah. I cover a little bit of everything. I dabble here and there. College basketball writer is good.
Okay. How's that going?
It's been good. It's been a good season. It's been an eventful season. I have not been over at the Smith Center as much as I traditionally am, but that's part of the reason why we're talking.
Yeah, and you're doing just a little bit more national stuff along with Duke.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously having one of the 2 best teams in the country right here makes my life a little bit easier. But yeah, I've done some stuff on Auburn, Indiana. I do a national column every week, so trying to expand the horizons. Unfortunately, the ACC alone doesn't really cut it anymore.
Yeah, and make sure to follow Brendan on Twitter. What's your Twitter? I'm pulling up right now. This is bad radio, but
at Brendan R. Mark.
Are you getting into Blue Sky?
I'm trying to. I actually like it a lot. Are you over there?
I'm not, but more and more people I thought, I never thought would leave Twitter or over there. So I'm intrigued a little bit. But I don't know, do you post twice on both things? I don't really get, what I don't know how it works, but.
Yeah,
Luke Cox, full-time Blue Sky. Brownlow, probably. I mean, a lot of people are Blue Sky now. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I cross-post a lot. So, if I drop something on Twitter, I'll put it on Blue Sky as well. I feel like it's like old Twitter almost. Like the engagement is very good. You can actually talk to people without getting flooded with 10,000 bots and like spam messages and whatever. So I like that aspect of it. Like the community is pretty good.
Gotcha. All right, we brought Brendan in to talk UNC basketball. I think the focus will be the GM hire. General manager and executive director Jim Tanner was hired yesterday, or announced yesterday. UNC grad, Morehead scholar, NBA agent for 20-plus years in D.C., Chicago Law School. Checks a lot of boxes. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Hubert contract as well. Let's start with the general manager, Jim Tanner. What do you think that role will be? I mean, we kind of know his background now. How would you explain what that role is for our listeners?
Yeah, so this role over the past 3 seasons has become something that's been popularized across the country. So, John Shire at Duke was the first one to have one, and he brought in Rachel Baker, who was a Nike marketing executive. That's basically one area in which these GM jobs have typically gone. Somebody who has a background in marketing, someone who can help with contract negotiation, who can help basically secure legitimate NIL deals for players. So that's one vein of it. I do think that Tanner's going to be doing a lot of that. Obviously, contract negotiation is something that he's negotiated hundreds of millions of dollars worth of NBA deals. So he's going to do a part of that. The secondary thing that you hear a lot about from these general manager jobs is obviously the basketball side of it. So, Syracuse, for example, just hired Alex Klein, who was a former scout with the New York Knicks and the New Orleans Pelicans. He's much more specifically in the basketball vein. So not doing as much of the contract stuff. He's scouting players. He's putting together transfer portal and high school reports. He's saying, hey, who do we think is going to go in? Why do we think they're going to go in? Can we give them what they're looking for? Doing some of that reconnaissance that you would have seen from an NBA scout. That's another vein that we've seen this be in. I think Tanner's role is probably mostly going to fit into that respect. I think it's mostly going to be talent evaluation, transfer portal recruiting, and then coupling that with the negotiating piece. The third thing that we see, and I think this is something that, he'll do some of this, but to a lesser extent, is someone who's there mostly to fundraise, to bring in donor funds. Obviously, North Carolina has the resources. It has brand power. It's not top of the NIL pool by any means, but I think he'll have some role there, but mostly he'll be doing basketball, scouting, reporting, transfer portal, and then also obviously helping with negotiating contracts and the team's salary cap.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like you go a lot of different ways with this hire. Like Rachel Baker, more of the on the marketing side, having worked for Nike. You can go straight like scout, a guy who knows a talent. I know, like I heard rumors of UNC going after some NBA front office people that their whole job is to acquire talent, to scout talent internationally, domestically, and then you have more of this agent route, which is obviously what UNC did. This guy knows how to deal with agents and deal with personnel and families, but it's different. I mean, I think the challenge is like this guy has no experience with grassroots basketball, with AAU, the kind of the grimy, dirty world that is. I mean, I don't know if you've had any interaction with AAU and handlers and stuff, but that's a different world. Where do you think UNC kind of stands with that? Do you think he'll bring in someone with that experience? Is that just something, because UNC's never had to, Roy didn't like dealing with handlers and dealing with AAU coaches. Is that just something that UNC doesn't do much? Or is it something you have to do now? And where do you think UNC goes to execute that round? Because now people looking for money too. It's a lot of it is how much money can I make? How much money can I make for the handler, for the agent, for the AAU coach, etc.
Yeah, so I mean that's one of my biggest questions with Tanner is it's very different negotiating with another reputable agent or an NBA team in a boardroom where everything is very standardized versus for lack of a better term, like being in the mud. And like, how is Tanner going to negotiate with somebody's uncle's barber in the back hallway of a gym in, the middle of like Kennesaw, Georgia? That is, I think, what remains to be seen. My understanding is that he's not going to be alone in this regard. So I've already heard that North Carolina will hire at least 2 other people to work in the scouting department. One name who I think has already been out there, but is Buzz Peterson, former assistant general manager with the Charlotte Hornets. Obviously comes in with a scouting background, doesn't have the AAU side. Somebody else I've heard is a little bit more on the younger side. We'll see, when/if that is announced. But this is not going to be just Tanner by himself. I thought that was the important line in UNC's release yesterday is he's going to be in charge of a scouting and analytics like department. And so like to me, the question with him, in addition to like, how does he do with these like handlers and people who are maybe a little less same background as he is what is like the structure here? Is this a situation where he is reporting directly to Hubert Davis? Is this a situation where he's reporting to Bubba Cunningham? Is it a situation where Hubert Davis's assistant coaches are coming to him? Like, what is that total hierarchy look like? I think that's the biggest thing that remains to be seen. And then, just talking to people yesterday as this was sort of, coming out, the biggest thing that is going to determine Jim Tanner's success or not, in my opinion, is if Hubert Davis listens to him or not. If Jim Tanner can do all this, you can scout people, you can do, you can have reports ready, you can know who's going in. But if the head coach, the guy who's actually responsible for pulling the trigger, is not willing to make those decisions or not making them quickly enough, you risk missing out on those opportunities. So that to me is the biggest question here is Jim Tanner somebody who Hubert Davis is really going to trust and listen to? I would imagine yes, if he's hiring for this role. But the last time he tried hiring someone, TJ Beisner from Kentucky, that obviously didn't materialize quite to this extent.
Yeah, it's like a super interesting power struggle Game of Thrones thing. The assumption is that Bubba Cunningham kind of forced this GM role into the staff and like, look, Hubert, you're going to hire a GM. We're going to hire a GM. I mean, is there any chance that Hubert reports to him? Is that even, I mean, you mentioned who reports to who, like, the GM, ultimately the head coach in NFL and NBA, they report to the GM. So with that topic, I'm not sure if that's the case. Anything on that?
I don't think so. And my philosophy in these situations is usually follow the money. If you're making the most money, you're usually who everyone reports to. So especially after his contract extension, Hubert Davis makes the most money. I will say, I know Matt Norlander from CBS put this out. My understanding is that Jim is going to be the second highest paid person with the basketball department.
Over 1 million, right?
Yes, that's my understanding. So, the way it was told to me was similarly to how Bill Belichick was given like a staff pool to allocate as he wanted for Michael Lombardi and whoever else he wanted to bring in for scouting. There was a pool of money set aside for, hey, this is going to be your new infrastructure arm. Jim Tanner is obviously going to be at the head of that. He's going to be at the front of that. He's going to take a large majority of that pool that was set aside, but the rest of it is where we'll see how many different staff members he can bring in with him.
It's very interesting now. UNC reportedly is going to have the highest paid GM in Jim Tanner, north of 1 million, and Michael Lombardi makes 1.5 million. That public record right there, like that's not even with any bonuses or anything. 1.5 million, which would make him gotta be top 5 football GM as well. So UNC's like super investing in the front office GM side on both athletic teams. All right, staff wise, you mentioned Buzz Peterson. Buzz Peterson, along with being with the Hornets, he's also been a college coach at numerous places: Appalachian State, East Tennessee, NC State, Vanderbilt. Head coach at Appalachian State, Tulsa, Tennessee, Coastal, App State again, and UNC Wilmington most recently before getting to the NBA thing. He's also the college roommate of Michael Jordan, and reportedly really good friends. I think they were groomsmen at each other's weddings or whatever. So that's another wrinkle to dive into. What else do you think is going to be the staff? You think it's going to have like a bunch of college grad, intern level statistics, analytics guys? They're going to bring in some scouts that are paid a little bit higher. Like, what do you think the front office could look like? We mentioned like a grassroots AAU guy. I think that'd be valuable. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but what could the front office look like? Or what would you want it to look like?
Yeah, so my understanding is that the other person who North Carolina has, already been talking to, and again, we'll see when it's announced, is somebody else with NBA ties. So it's somebody else who currently works for an NBA franchise, somebody who does have that experience. I think the big thing to know here is, like, when we're talking about the transfer portal specifically and scouting the transfer portal, and that's going to be a huge part of Jim Tanner's job, that can't be a process that starts when the transfer portal opens. That has to be a process that starts beforehand. And I think in that respect, that's an area where North Carolina can still catch up a little bit. I mean, this is already happening. There are already players, their parents, their handlers, coaches calling around saying, this guy might go in. Would you be interested? This guy's going in. Will you be interested? You have to start this process now. It's, call it tampering, call it what you want. It's the reality of the situation. And if you're not in that game, you're behind. And so I think bringing in these people with NBA ties, they're used to having those sorts of conversations. They're used to looking at other players on other teams for the trade market. Like, they're used to doing that in-season scouting and looking at fit. So I think that the NBA background piece of this is going to be really big, like probably more so than what you're talking about, Ross, like the grassroots, the handling. Like, they do have Hubert for that. They do have assistant coaches for that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's an area where, to be frank, North Carolina's been successful. I mean, you've got 2 top 10 recruits this year. You've got another one coming in next year. You had another one last year. Like, Hubert Davis has been able to get top 10 recruits. Like, the high school piece of it has been there. And this is the first season in college basketball history where transfers are on pace to score more points than high school recruits are. So I think that's an important thing to consider, like, especially as UNC moves forward. This is going to continue to be a transfer-heavy program, which is why I think the NBA ties are going to be more attractive as Jim Tanner's filling out his staff.
Yeah, it's like what Rick Pitino said. He's not even getting high school kids next year. He's going right in the transfer portal. It makes sense. You get a sophomore or junior with already some experience, with a college-ready body that can immediately come in and contribute, so you're ready to win immediately. In the release, Tanner, among other things, will help with manage the construction of the roster, negotiate contracts, identify and hire new scouting and analytics staff, and spearhead player development programs. He said he's going to attract domestic and international talent while staying true to the principles and values that has defined Carolina basketball over the years. On paper, I mean, Tanner checks so many boxes. The UNC family thing, as much as some fans want them to get outside the family, he seems like of that pool a really great option. Professional, experienced, respected, legal mind, business mind. I'm sure he's gonna be great with families. Family man, 2 kids went to UNC. What else can you say about him? And like, when you saw this hire, when you heard his name, 2 or 3 weeks ago, did it excite you? Were you pretty pumped that this was the guy that UNC was going after?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll say I've never met Jim Tanner. I don't know him personally at all. However, one thing that I think is, when I first started to hear this name, I mean, even this has been in the works since before the Super Bowl. Like people should know that. This has been multiple weeks to get across the finish line. But the best thing I can say about him is I have never spoken to anybody, an NBA scout, NBA general managers, assistant general managers, other head coaches who have worked with him. I know a couple of his clients, like. Nobody has a bad word to say about this dude.
Mhm.
Nobody. And that's very rare to find in any level of basketball, especially at the NBA level. So I think that, like, exactly what you're saying, Ross, like, if you were dedicated to keeping it in the family, which Hubert Davis obviously is, this is probably about as good a candidate as you're going to find. How he relates to the, you know, underside of basketball, for lack of a better term, we'll see. I think he'll be fine. He'll adjust. Again, my understanding is like this is going to be a quick jump in for him. This is not
Yeah.
something where he's not starting until August or whatever. Like, this is already percolating. This is going. Like they're announcing him now for a reason. So, I thought that as far as like hiring someone who will do again, it all comes back to will Hubert Davis listen to him? He has the credentials and the background that should warrant that. But obviously, actually seeing it come to fruition is a different story.
Man, I wonder if it's going to be like, if it's going to be very divided. Like, Hubert, you handle the roster when they're at Carolina and their coaching and practices and development and your staff and maybe high school recruiting. But other than that, Tanner is going to get the talent, is going to handle bringing in transfers, assists with high school recruiting and those NIL deals and what's needed for that side. I wonder if it'd be a complete division of power, which probably be the best way, the best route. Also, the timing, yeah, critical. I mean, it should have happened a month ago, should have happened 2 or 3 years ago, but the transfer portal opens less than 2 weeks from today. I think it opens the Monday after the first weekend of the tournament, which would be March 24th, I believe. And it's open for 30 days, not 45 days like last year. So it's a small window and it opens a little bit later. Last year, I think it opened the Monday after the conference tournaments, the week of the NCAA tournament. So a couple changes there, which I think are for the better. Smaller window and a little bit later opening there. So critical to start finding which transfers. I think it's a great point you made. Like, it's more free agency he's going to be dealing with, finding other college players to get them to transfer in, identifying who's available, who fits, who wants to come to Carolina, and then recruiting them, figuring out what they need from NIL and from a money standpoint, and bringing in what that'd be huge this year. UNC's going to have to. What do you think UNC's going to bring in? They're going to have to bring in what? At least 6 transfers. I'm always saying like 6 to 8 to fill out the roster.
I mean, and it's going to be this way almost every single year. Like, I think UNC fans are still getting used to that. Like, and college basketball fans in general, like that's the way it is now. Like, Caleb Wilson obviously comes in. He's your one recruit you're definitely counting on playing. I think Dixon will probably end up having a role too. But you're losing at least RJ Davis, Jalen Withers. Ian Jackson, I think, is definitely gone at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one, if not both, of Seth Trimble and Elliot Cadeau.
Vin Allen Lubin and Jalen Washington.
They both still have eligibility.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that, there should probably be a better option brought in to be UNC starting center. If that can be. The thing to me that's going to be really interesting is we now have 4 seasons of data on Hubert as a coach. And the most important position, the fulcrum for UNC's success under him, has been the 4-man spot every single year. So, you think back to his debut season, Dawson Garcia, Brady Manick trying to struggle that line. Dawson Garcia leaves the program. Brady Manick takes off, national championship run, all those good things. Second year, Pete Nance comes in, doesn't have that athleticism, doesn't stretch the floor. There isn't as much driving room for the guards. It all falls apart. Last year, Harrison Ingram, fantastic. This year, it's been a patchwork quilt. Drake Powell, Jalen Withers, a little bit of Cade Tyson. Like, it's been a little bit of everybody. So, like, that position has to be locked down. If I'm North Carolina, I don't think I want to go into next season with just Caleb Wilson there. I think he's going to be a productive player, but I don't think, again, this is the oldest era of college basketball ever. I don't know that you want to rely on him to be an every game starter right out of the gate. I don't know that he's going to stretch the floor the way that Hubert necessarily wants, from his 4-man position. But yeah, I think you're talking about like certainly at least one starting guard and one starting big. I can tell you for a fact that North Carolina's already done some due diligence on some guys, high major guys in the portal who, if they end up coming to fruition, like in matriculating, would be incredible additions. You're probably talking about, the thing that's going to be interesting is like, can you get Drake Powell back? Because he's he's to me the highest upside guy on the roster who can come back. And if you can't get him, that almost changes your whole pecking order, because getting a wing like that is going to be paramount next season. But if you can get Drake Powell back, I mean, you move mountains to make that happen.
Do you think that's pretty likely? Offer him $2 million, offer him, a bunch of money to come back?
Well, offering Drake Powell $2 million is a lot of money. Like, $2 million is like all-American money.
Okay.
That would be more than a third of North Carolina's current NIL budget. So
yeah.
I don't know about that. But you offer him a lot. Like, he's the biggest unknown on the roster right now. Like, NBA scouts are not even sure if he's going or staying. I think it would behoove him to stay. Like, as we've seen, he's looked much, much better not being, sort of misplayed as a small ball 4. He's clearly a 2-3. You've seen him get out in the break much more. Like, he's been able to showcase, I think, a lot more since Hubert Davis has made this lineup shift. So, yeah, I mean, as of right now, I think it is very possible he comes back, but I think it's the biggest unknown on UNC's roster. And, one way or the other is going to completely change what next year's team looks like.
Yeah, and I think the Seth Trimble-Cadeau thing is interesting too. I've been kind of saying that could see Cadeau leaving for a different option, but Seth Trimble coming back will be huge. I mean, if you get Trimble and Powell back, I mean, that's a good thing to build around, along with Caleb Wilson, and you kind of have at least 3 starters there. Again, Caleb Wilson's not going to be some fantastic Cooper Flagg, AJ DeBonta type player. He's going to be kind of a role player, rebounds, defense, get out and break, lob threat, but he's not going to be some alpha scorer. You can hopefully get 10 rebounds or 8 rebounds and 10 points from him would be great. Just a more athletic 4, which is huge. Super interesting about the stretch 4 and Hubert's success. You've seen Jalen Withers now step into that role in the last 4 games, becoming a 3-point threat and providing some more rebounding. And UNC's kind of thrived against some bad competition. All right, real quick. Hubert Davis's contract. Any takes on that? I mean, it was happening already. It was signed in December. Been in the works since the summer. We're going to actually have Brian Murphy on. He may already have come on the podcast already to talk about that. But any takes on that contract, and what does it mean for UNC basketball, I guess, is the best question.
Yeah, so I think, like, for one, you look at it from Hubert's perspective, and like the fact that he was making $400,000 a year in base salary before is like kind of insulting. It's kind of insulting. Not even like when you consider what he's done, like, in his first 3 years, he had a national championship run and a 1 seed that won the ACC. Like, that alone should make the $400,000 laughable. The fact that you're UNC and you're not even paying your head coach that much is like kind of crazy. I do think that it's interesting that the buyout is still going to be relatively low thereafter. So it's only his base salary times the number of years remaining. So, for example, they're not going to, but even if they were going to get rid of Hubert Davis after this year, it's only about $6.5 million. That's incredibly affordable. Some of these other coaches who are being talked about in the carousel this season, like, Dennis Gates at Missouri, Mick Cronin at UCLA, Nate Oates at Alabama, obviously, like, you're talking about like triple that for their buyouts. So it's still relatively affordable in the grand scheme of things. If UNC was bringing a new head coach, they're not paying that guy less than $4 million a year. So they're still getting a massive bargain with Hubert. I think that allocates more money for this staff pool with Tanner and these guys. When revenue sharing comes into the fold here over the summer, is that more money that you can then allocate to the athletes? I think that's interesting. To me, like, it just kind of, the timing of it is so weird. Like, why not announce this? Like, why not announce it in July? And it's a feel-good thing, and everyone's happy, and, like, you don't have this, like, nebulous cloud hanging over Hubert's head that there's been all season. And, I mean, like, I think like, IC and the News and Observer and everybody, like, I think the sentiment largely has been we all expected him to be back regardless. The Duke and the Clemson losses, I think, shook that maybe a little bit, but he was never going anywhere because this has been there the whole time. So I don't totally understand the timing, but it certainly shows that he's going to be back next season at bare minimum. But if they miss the tournament, I mean, he'll still be on the hot seat next year.
I think Adam Smith said that it was signed the day of the loss to Alabama.
It was.
Tar Heels was 7 games in the season when Hubert Davis and Bubba Cunningham signed that contract on December 4th. Later that night, Alabama beat UNC in a rout in the Smith Center, which is crazy.
Yeah. So they signed it. They signed it the 4th. I think Hubert and Bubba signed it on the 4th. Chancellor Roberts signed it like maybe a week later. The other finance people signed it later. But yeah, those two signing it the day of the Alabama game is hilarious.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's pretty normal to have a 4 and 5 year contract. Like, for most coaches, provides the security you need for recruiting. If you have a 1-year contract, it's bigger in football, I think, but it still remains here. And yeah, I think the huge part is it's just affordable buyout. If I was Hubert's lawyer, man, why not make that buyout bigger? Like, it's just kind of laughable how cheap it is. It's 1.25 million times the amount of years left on the contract. Yeah, so like you said, the max would be close to 6, and it goes down every year. Yeah, I mean, I see all this as UNC going all in on Hubert. We're going to provide him with as much support as possible, bringing in a high-level GM, surround him with staff, analytics, scouting, bring in Buzz Peterson, and then redo your contract and pay you, and NIL, whatever support you need. Go all in on Hubert, provide him as much support as possible for the next year or two, and see if it works. And if it doesn't work after that, cut bait and move on. He's going to be on the hot seat next year, especially if they don't make the tournament. There's a slim chance to make the tournament this year. Georgia winning last night with Florida doesn't help UNC's chances. But yeah, all right. Brennan, appreciate your time, man. Big hitter.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's one more thing I can say about
Let's
Hubert,
go.
just because you said that, Ross, I think that Hubert has gotten a bad rap as an actual basketball coach, and I think that explains the thinking that you just described. Like, why they're going in all in on the infrastructure with him is because Hubert is a better basketball coach, strictly basketball coach, than a lot of fans give him credit for. Like, he is willing to press buttons. He is willing to try different things. They've played 15 different defensive coverages this year. He constantly is switching the starting lineup. He's playing with rotations. Like, he is doing all of the things that he can. Like, you can criticize him for the roster construction, and you should, because UNC missed in the offseason. But as far as like what he's trying to do with the guys in that, gym on October 1st or whatever, I'm not saying he's maximized it, but he certainly is not sitting on his hands and just accepting their fate. So like, I think that explains why you're investing in the infrastructure with him, because he's proven if you give him the pieces, it's kind of like Roy. If you give him the pieces he needs, you give him a 4, you give him a point guard, you give him a rebounder, he can put together a pretty solid team. That's the part that he's been incapable of doing consistently. And so that, I think, explains the larger thinking behind all of this, really.
Yeah, I mean, the offense in so many games this year has been so stale. And it's like, man, this team was 22, it was rocking with Brady Manick. And last year it looked so good. So it comes down to talent. You've got to have shooters. You've got to have be able to stretch the floor with a 4-man. It helps to have a rebounder and a gravity player like Baycott in the middle. And they're missing those 2 huge pieces. And look, the team has not quit on him. They've played great against poor talent last 4 games. They played great. They're rebounding better. He switched the lineup out. He's adapted, needed a bigger lineup. They beat the teams they're supposed to. Just really struggled against really good teams. 1-10 in quad win wins, and then just like, man, couple one or 2 point losses, one position losses has really cost him, and it's going to cost this team come Selection Sunday. All right, Brendan, we have kind of an identical look here. We both have black sweatshirts, glasses.
We do.
Well,
yeah. You're rocking the rowback, I see. You're rocking the rowback.
Yeah, that's right.
They're good
that's
stuff.
right.
I like that. I like that. Armando put me on them. I wasn't familiar with their game before.
Yeah, those sweatshirts are great. We have like exact same haircut, exact same hair color. All right, Brendan, we appreciate your time, guys. Remember to follow Brendan on Twitter and check out his stuff on The Athletic. New York Times Athletic subscription is definitely worth the cost. You get all that stuff with a subscription to The Athletic. Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, now we bring on Brian Murphy to the Big Hitters Only podcast. Brian is a sports investigative reporter for WRAL. We're looking live at the WRAL offices. What's up, Brian?
Hey, thanks for having me, Ross.
Yeah. Can you tell us exactly what your job is? Because you're not just UNC. it's all colleges, or define your role for us.
I wish I could. I do a little bit of everything here at WRAL. How I kind of explain it is everything off the court. So, a lot of contract stuff, dealing with the Carolina Hurricanes, their redevelopment of the arena and the area around the arena. I get sucked into a lot of board of trustees, board of governors stuff, coaches contracts, the new Smith Center, wherever they end up building that, that's a story I've been following. So a lot of, not necessarily on the court, on the field stuff, but anything that happens off the field. I was heavily involved in the Belichick coaching search. That obviously got a lot of attention. I won't be covering, who Carolina's left guard is, but I probably will be covering what Mike Lombardi makes and how they handle NIL money. NIL obviously is a big part of it. Lawsuits, there seems to be a new lawsuit every day. So a lot of that's how I describe it. I don't know if that's a great definition of what it is.
Yeah, a lot of public records requests, right?
A lot of those. Yep.
What are those called again?
FOIA requests or public
Yeah.
records. Mostly Freedom of Information Act requests, but yeah, a lot of documents. I got a lot of legal cases, a lot of athletic department, budgets on my desk and on my computer.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, a true capital J. I mean, this is a serious journalist, not really on the beat day to day like I was with UNC and like some of our people have been, but definitely a great follow on Twitter. Murph Sturf, MurphSturph on Twitter. A great follow. Yeah, like super interesting stuff. Like our listeners are super locked into the Dean Dome, Smith Center construction stuff. You were locked into the Belichick stuff. Really, UNC is probably your biggest beat because I'm sure it gets the most clicks, but I'm sure you do stuff with NC State and Duke as well, along with the Carolina Hurricanes. So a great person to follow. We're having Brian on because he broke the Hubert Davis contract news, which is kind of weird because it was signed in December, but kind of worked out this summer. And we'd always heard rumors it was happening. Why did it happen yesterday? Like, why did that news break yesterday? Like, what had to happen for it to come to public knowledge?
Yeah, I don't know exactly why it came out yesterday, but this is a process. We've seen it even with the Belichick contract, right? It takes a long time from the time they agree to it to the time it gets signed to the time it gets released publicly. I don't know why there's that huge gap. You would think this was signed in December, could have been released sometime in December. We're 2 months after it was signed before it gets publicly released. I heard about it a couple of weeks ago that it was done and have been filing public records requests, asking for a copy of it, knowing that Carolina fans may not be thrilled that there is an extension. What I had to remind people is that this was signed after they won the ACC regular season title, after they had, were a number one seed in the tournament, after they reached the Sweet 16. Of course, they were going to give an extension at that time. Right now, fans don't necessarily feel great about it, but at the time, it made sense. Why the long delay? I don't know. I haven't been able to get to the bottom of why it was agreed to in July, not signed until December, and then not released until February. Although I will say, these things simply take time. Like it took a couple months to get the Belichick contract. When lawyers get involved, these things, kind of drag on.
So inside journalism here, why did it come out yesterday? Did you filed a request to get anything about it, or did they release it? How did that happen?
Yeah, Carolina puts, to their credit, they put all of their contracts on a public facing website. So you can go and look for any contract that has been released publicly, and they're all on a public facing website. But how often that site is updated. If you go, you'll see no assistant coach for football contracts. Right now, they just have Freddie Kitchens and Nate Means' old contracts up there. None of the new contracts. And we know some of those guys have been hired and they've signed contracts. So it does take a while for it to get there. But if you file a public records request, this is really inside baseball here. But if you file a public records request with Carolina for an athletics contract, they will just direct you to this site. And so I've been checking that site. I got a tip that the new contract had been posted to that site yesterday morning. As soon as I got a tip, I was able to find the contract, post it. And that was a result, I think, of me asking for it multiple times, saying, hey, I think this contract is done. Is there any way I can get a copy of it? Things like that.
Yeah, just trying to being annoying to whatever SID or comms director has that info. Yeah, so you're not just clicking refresh on that page. You got a little tip that it was going to be up. All right, let's go through it real quick. I have the numbers, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to read them out here, and then we'll dive into it a little bit. There's going to be a deep dive into Hubert's new contract. All right, so it's a 2-year extension through 2030. All right, and we're currently in 2025. The agreement was reached in July, signed in December. His original contract the base salary was $400,000. It's now the base salary. This is what comes from UNC is $1.25 million per year with an increase of $100,000 per year.
No, the base salary stays the same throughout the entire contract. So the 2022 extension, it was $400,000 throughout. This 2024 extension, it's $1.25 million throughout.
Okay. He has $1.7 million in supplemental compensation, and much of that is from $750,000 from Nike and Learfield. Learfield is like the Tar Heel Sports Network, along with a lot of the deals that they do through Hubert. And the buyout is his base salary times the amount of years remaining on the contract. Essentially, this is a 6-year contract worth $24 million in total salary, right?
Right.
Total compensation.
Let's back up just 1 second. That base is the base is 1.25. The supplemental is 1.7. That grows by 100,000 each year in the contract. So eventually we get to 2.2 million by the last year of the contract. That does not include the Nike money, the Learfield money, or expenses, which is another 750,000. So, the base salary is 1.2. You added the 1.7 for the supplemental, another 750,000 on top of that. He's at 3.75 for this year. I guess just slightly below 3.7. Well, he's at 3.75 for this year. That's how it works. I guess it's about 800,000 from Learfield, Nike, and expenses. So that's 3.75. That's 800,000 on top of the 2.95 that he was getting from the base and the supplemental. If everybody stuck with that through that.
Yeah, what's included in the supplemental then?
Well, the reason that they split out the supplemental from the base is because of the buyout that you mentioned. If you put it all, it's all basically base salary. It's all guaranteed money. But if you put that all as the base salary, and then you were to fire Hubert Davis, or this is true for, has been true in previous contracts. It was true in the Mac Brown contract. You only owe the base. I think Carolina got in some trouble with the Larry Fedora contract, where all of it was together. And when he got fired, he got owed all of it. And so in order to limit their exposure, they've split base from supplemental. I don't know that there's any difference in where that money comes from or how it's paid. It's just simply split in the contract so that when and if a coach gets fired, and they're all hired to be fired at this point, they only owe the base salary. They don't owe the full compensation package as a buyout. And that's why you see increases in the supplemental, but not increases in the base.
Gotcha. And speaking of getting fired, what do you think about how this buyout is constructed?
Yeah, this is what Carolina has sort of adopted with all their coaches, where they owe the base. What I think is super interesting is the only material change in the contract besides the years is that the base salary went from 400,000 to 1.25 million. So that just makes it a lot more expensive to fire Hubert Davis. Under the old thing, if he were fired after this season, which again I don't think is going to happen, he would have been owed about 1.2 million. 400,000 is old base salary times 3 years left on the contract. If he were to be fired after this season, he'd be owed $6.25 million. Obviously, that's a huge difference, and I'm assuming Hubert and his agent know that, and that's why they wanted the base salary increased. For example, Kevin Keats at NC State has a very similar base and supplemental pay. His base salary is 1.325 million, so slightly higher, but basically in the same ballpark.
Yeah, and the whole scheme of college basketball makes it affordable to fire Hubert, in a year or two if things don't work out. It's not like a massive amount of money compared to other coaches across the country, right?
Right. I mean, if you look at his total compensation, I was using that 3.75 figure. Now, he can also earn about $1.2 million in bonuses based on performance, mostly based on on-court performance, a few based on academic performance. But if you use that 3.75 number, which is guaranteed, that puts him about 23rd, 24th, depending on how some of the other contracts around the country have been updated. So I'd say he's in the top 30, not in the top 5, not in the top 10. That often those lists from USA Today don't include private schools because it's a lot harder to get their contract information. So probably slide down a few more spots. So he's not being paid as a top 5 coach. It's a very reasonable contract, in terms of college athletics. And the buyout is even smaller than if he were getting all that numbers rolled into one. So if the base and supplemental were considered his base pay, his buyout would be close to $15 million. It's not. It would only be 6.25 after this year, going down 1.25 after each year.
All right, and stepping away from the numbers and the figures, what do you think this contract really means for UNC basketball and for Hubert Davis? Like, maybe put on a little fan hat or a little bit less of a journalistic hat. Like, what does this mean? This is what fans want to think about. Like, I'm sure the casual fan who's wanted Hubert gone, doesn't like this. They don't like to see that his contract's now extended to 2030. The buyout, I think, if you look at the buyout, it kind of changes that. Like, it's not that hard to fire him. It's not like some $20 million buyout. But what do you think this means? What is UNC and Bubba Cunningham, trustees, et cetera, what are they doing and saying with this contract?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to think about the timing. I think the timing is super important on this. Would he have signed this contract today? Probably not. But he signed it coming off a season in which they won the ACC regular season title. They made it to the ACC championship game in the tournament. They were a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. They lost in the Sweet 16 to a very good Alabama team. The program was riding high at the time that this contract was signed. I think you always look at the number of years. Now, certainly college basketball is a year-to-year sport these days, but coaches always want that security of 4 or 5 years so they can go out and recruit. I don't know that it matters, but they always want it, and they're always going to ask for it. I think this was a commitment to Hubert Davis, right? If you look at the time that it was agreed to, Hubert Davis had reached one Final Four and one Sweet 16. He'd won 20 games in the other season. They didn't make the NCAA tournament, but they'd won 20 games. They were probably up, if they don't lose that 4 overtime game to Alabama that year, they probably make the tournament. So the program was trending up, I think, at that point. If you judge it based on what's happened right now, you're like, oh man, what's going on? Why would they ever agree to this contract? It looks like they may miss the tournament for the second time in 3 years, all that stuff. But I think at the time it was a commitment to Hubert Davis. They want Hubert Davis to be their head coach. I mean, Matt Doherty went 8-20 and didn't get fired. This thought that Hubert Davis was going to have 4 seasons of 20 plus wins, a Final Four, a Sweet 16, and maybe miss the tournament twice, as the first team out or the second team out, and they were going to get rid of him. That doesn't compute for me. And, I went to Carolina. I've been around the program for a long time. I've seen how they treat coaches. It just didn't compute that they were going to get rid of a Carolina lifer after that 4-season run.
Yeah, we talked about this with Brendan Marks as well, who's also going to be on this podcast. It just shows that UNC's going all in with Hubert, providing him with support, not only financially and extending his contract, but hiring a GM and a front office staff. They're going to give him everything he needs to be successful in terms of NIL, the ability to recruit and acquire talent through the transfer portal and the high school ranks, and now a little bit more financially as well. So they're going all in. If it doesn't work in a year or two, if they have they have to make a tournament next year if they don't make it this year. Like, they have to go all in. Like, making the tournament should be that should happen every year. It should be whether you're a 1 seed or a 2 seed or a 3 seed, not whether you're going to make the tournament or not. That's kind of the UNC standard. So, not making it's a huge deal, but this is showing full support, all in on Hubert, and then see what happens next year with a GM and stuff. All right, anything else on the contract? Is there anything else anything inside that you read or researched that you want our listeners to know?
The only other change that we've talked about the years and the base salary, the only other change which I thought was interesting is they upped the bonus for reaching the Sweet 16 from $75,000 to $150,000. Not a huge change,
okay,
obviously, in the scheme of things, but to me it was interesting they reached the Sweet 16 last year, and that's the one change they made in all the bonuses. But I think you're right. Making the tournament is the baseline for UNC basketball, and I think when Hubert said he was going to hire a GM, that should have been a sign to fans that they're not getting rid of Hubert Davis. I'm not sure why that didn't compute with all fans, but when he said, I'm expanding the staff, I'm hiring a GM, that should have been a signal that he's getting more resources and at least getting one more season to turn this thing around.
Yeah, not compete with fans. You're trying to rationalize with fans out there. That's never fun. I was gonna ask, I want to get to Bill Belichick too, but the general manager thing. Do you think Hubert wants a general manager?
This is where not being around the team day to day, I think, is a little bit tough for me to make these, guesses. But in this case, I think, if you listen to the interview with the Carolina Live guys, the podcast, he says, he has a quote in there. He says, owner, GM, fundraiser, basketball coach. I think, at least if I'm taking him at face value, he thinks that the job is just too big for one person. That you can't be an owner and a general manager and a fundraiser and the coach, and that what he really likes to do is coach basketball, and all the other stuff is getting in the way. If you take that at face value, I think then that Hubert would welcome a general manager, would welcome a front office, would welcome some additional support staff to help with all the parts of the job that maybe he doesn't love, or maybe that distract or take away from coaching basketball. And I take him at face value. Hubert seems to be a guy who wears his emotions on his sleeve, tells you what he really thinks. And in this case, he basically laid it out. The job is too big for one person at this point.
It's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if there'll be a division of powers with, he handles on the court stuff. He's given a roster with the players that have been acquired in the transfer portal and in the high school ranks, and he handles development practices and coaching and game coaching and probably some fundraising stuff here and there. But it is with the NIL and with the transfer portal, it is a much bigger job that requires more hands in the pool there.
The one thing I'm looking in the offseason, and this is whether they make the tournament or don't, does he have to make changes to his coaching staff? I don't know if Hubert wants to make changes to his coaching staff or if that will be pushed on him from others, but that's one thing I think I'm really looking at in this offseason. Do they shake up the coaching staff and try to bring in people, I mean, God forbid, who haven't played basketball at North Carolina previously?
Yeah, it's something I brought up a couple of times in this podcast. You know, it's a staff of all UNC family, coaches that haven't really coached anywhere else in some respects, or failed head coaches, guys that might necessarily be fighting for their coaching life or trying to move up. You want hungry coaches. You want young, hungry coaches who are going to recruit their ass off and coach their ass off and develop to get a higher assistant job at another school or to be a head coach at a different level. So you want hungry coaches. I'm not sure how many of these current assistants are dying to leave Chapel Hill in a pretty content, coaching here in Blue Heaven for Carolina basketball. All right. We already talked a lot about the GM stuff with Brendan, so I want to talk to you about Belichick's contract. You'd certainly have a different perspective and bring new intel. What was the whole process of that hire? You're pretty locked into the whole Belichick hiring and the contract and the Michael Lombardi stuff. You go to all the press conferences. I don't really know where to start with this, but what was the most interesting thing from the coaching search and the hiring of Belichick that stands out to you?
Yeah, the most interesting thing to me, and we've seen this play out, is how involved the Board of Trustees was, or certain members of the Board of Trustees. I won't say the entire board was involved, but certainly certain members of the Board of Trustees were very involved. And now we've seen the Board of Governors and the system president, Peter Hans, kind of smack down the Board of Trustees and say, listen, you guys, your job is to help the chancellor, not to be running coaching searches, not to be, negotiating perhaps outside of your lane. And it was pretty clear from that letter that that's what he thinks happened, at least. And I would imagine Lee Roberts is obviously the chancellor at UNC, used to be on the Board of Governors. Probably played some role in that letter. I don't know that for a fact, but that reads like a letter empowering the chancellor, saying the chancellor is in charge of the university, not the Board of Trustees. And you guys can help him, but your job is not to go out there and negotiate on behalf of the University of North Carolina. And so that to me was the biggest takeaway. We heard throughout the process, I reported throughout the process that the Board of Trustees was involved. Certain members of the Board of Trustees was involved. You saw national reporting. There was, uncertainty about who was in charge of the search. I had a senior official tell me on the record background that, the Board of Trustees was delaying the search and making it more difficult. So there was certainly that push and pull between the chancellor, the athletic director, the Board of Trustees. To me, that's the most interesting part. I mean, I think it's pretty clear the Board of Trustees wanted Bill Belichick. They got him. And what are the ramifications of that down the line?
Was initiating the Belichick thing from one or two Board of Trustees from what you can tell?
I think the Belichick camp reached out to Carolina. I mean, he was on their initial list of 30 or so, 30, 40 candidates that they started talking about, I think probably after the James Madison game. I think after the James Madison game, it became clear that whatever situation with Mac Brown wasn't tenable. I don't know if he resigned. I don't know if people in the room thought he resigned. I don't know what happened at James Madison. There's people who have better intel on that than me, but it's pretty clear after the James Madison game, whether it was because of the score, giving up 70 at home, or whether it was because of what he said after the game, that's when Carolina started, at least putting together a list. Belichick was on that list, and I don't know if he was on that list because they were like, hey, let's try to get Bill Belichick, or if he was on that list because some people in his camp made it clear that, hey, Belichick might be interested in coaching. But it's clear that he was on whatever initial list they put together.
And with Belichick, why did it take so long from when it was rumored they had interviewed another time, Bubba and dignitaries went up to New York to talk to him, to when it was hired? There was such that delay between it being announced. What was going on there? Was it just contract negotiations? What was happening?
I think a lot of it was contract negotiations. I mean, that contract, which we have now seen, is somewhat complicated. When you're talking about the revenue sharing portion, things that aren't even in the contract, the revenue share, what his assistant salary pool is, $10 million, what his support staff pool is. I think there was some talk about the buyout, which we've heard a ton about the buyout. If he leaves before he coaches a game, it's this. If he leaves, before June, it's this. If he leaves after June, it's this. So I think there were pretty complex negotiations. It is interesting that senior official at the university said the board of trustees made the process more complicated. I do wonder when you have multiple people, presumably multiple people talking to the camp at different times, if some signals got crossed about what might be in a contract, what wouldn't be in a contract, what this pool might be, what that pool might be.
Yeah. And then what do you think? Anything else with the contract that stood out? Anything with Michael Lombardi that you've noticed interviewing and talking to him? What else? I just so intrigued by this whole Belichick deal.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. I want to see what Lombardi's making. I kind of want to see what Tanner is making.
So Lombardi's making $1.5 million. That's public record. That's on the database.
Okay. I hadn't seen that one pop yet, but that's interesting. That's the cost of doing business. When you're bringing in Belichick at $10 million, Lombardi at 1.5 is, just sort of the cost of doing business. They brought in Moses Cabrera, who was the strength coach at New England. I'm fascinated by this NFL-esque approach. A lot of the assistant coaches have spent time in the NFL. The recruiting seems to be going well, although they're not necessarily contending for 5-star top of the line guys, but they are getting a lot of prospects. And Lombardi says they're trusting their eyes. These guys have a lot of experience trying to decide what makes a good football player. I think the whole experiment is fascinating, and I know that there are people who think it's going to be a complete failure, and there are people who's going to think it's going to be an ultimate success. I'm not sure where I think. I think it'll probably be somewhere in the middle because that's where most outcomes are.
Yeah, I can't wait to go to some press conferences and just kind of cover it. I'm not super, day to day on the beat anymore, but still have access. And just like the post-game press conferences, the midweek press conferences, is he going to come to the ACC media days in Charlotte, which is a full-day thing? You're doing silly things for the ACC network. You're in that round table. Can you imagine the horde of reporters around him when you get like unfiltered 30 minutes unfiltered time? You still there, Brian? Okay, good. We got you.
I'm here, yep.
I'm just interested to see how he handles the media stuff and what he does and doesn't do. Does he do? I'm assuming he has to do the radio show some extent. So you see him at top of the hill for an hour with Jones Angel, shaking hands and kissing babies with all the blue hairs in Chapel Hill. We're talking about here in February on the brink of March Madness, but your insight into that contract was super interesting. All right, with the Board of Trustees stuff, since that letter from the Board of Governors, have things chilled out? The power struggle between the Board of Trustees, the Chancellor, and Bubba Cunningham is super interesting. Have they chilled out and backed off from their influence on athletics since that? What any more dynamics regarding the BOT?
It's been relatively quiet, right? The Board of Trustees, I don't believe, has met since that letter came out. No one responded to me, at least when I asked for a comment on that letter. It seems like the board is taking a step back for the time being. One question I still have about the Hubert Davis contract is, when did the Board of Trustees approve that? Obviously, I watched the agenda for the Board of Trustees pretty closely, as do I know other reporters, and no one reported that they had approved a contract extension for Hubert Davis. So that's one question that's still outstanding, that I still have. It probably would have had to have happened last summer or in the fall at some point. But I mean, I think everyone after the Belichick thing is kind of taking a step back and realized, after that letter, that I think they're going to have to figure some things out, how they share power at UNC, because the old way has earned at least one rebuke, and I think multiple rebukes from the system president. Lee Roberts is obviously a new chancellor asserting his power. I mean, I got asked the other day about Bubba Cunningham's future. Obviously, I think he's got the backing of Lee Roberts. He's well respected in the industry, but how much longer does he want to put up with a board that's, a thorn in his side? I think these are all legitimate questions.
Super interesting. Well, Brian, we appreciate your time. Hope you enjoyed your time on the Big Hitters Only podcast. We appreciate you listening. We're going to have you back on, man. I think what you bring to, it's a different perspective on covering athletics, and you bring insight into a lot of interesting aspects to definitely what UNC is doing on the basketball football side. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.